How do we establish pricing? What does it mean? And how is it used? So that's kind of what we're talking about pricing. It's obviously very important to both the seller and the buyer, um, but it's different than many people think. So let's think about what pricing is. It's the easiest one of the four P's to implement and the easiest one to change. So we can um, we can change our price these days almost immediately, since most prices are electronically created in retail stores and for manufacturers and for wholesalers. So we can change price almost instantaneously. It takes a lot longer to change your distribution channels or to change production, the product itself, the place that we sell it, that kind of thing. So pricing is the easiest of the four P's to implement, change it immediately. Um, and in addition, pricing directly produces revenue. So what we set our price at has a lot to do with what our revenue is. It's not just price times units sold, because as we change price, our units sold may change as well. So, but it's a direct relationship to how much revenue we generate, how much we charge for something. So really powerful and easy to implement. And because of that, it gets a lot of attention, not necessarily in the marketing area, but in the executive area, because if things are bad, hey, we can increase revenue by reducing price, or it's easy to make that change, and it looks like a simple fix to what might be a very complex problem. So sometimes management uses pricing in a way that may not be the most efficient way to use it. We're going to look at two different kinds of pricing, and we deal with both of these all the time in terms of our consumption when we're consumers. There's fixed pricing and there's dynamic pricing. When you go into Walmart to buy something, let's say you're buying paper towels, and the price on the rack is $2 a roll. So you go to the checkout counter, you buy 5 rolls, and you go to the checkout counter, and it's a $10 charge, which the clerk scans the item and it adds up to $10, and they say $10, please. That's a fixed pricing model. You don't have the option of saying to the clerk, well, I bought 5, can I get a better price? This is I'd like a lower price. These paper towels aren't all that good. We'd like a different price for these. That doesn't happen in a Walmart. That's a fixed pricing environment, fixed price environment. There's a little bit of dynamic pricing. I think they match prices with other retailers, but you got to prove that the other retailer is selling it cheaper or something like that. But it's basically a fixed price environment. You don't negotiate price at a Walmart. Much of retail is a fixed pricing environment. However, you go to an automobile dealer and do you pay the sticker price at an automobile dealer, or do you negotiate or bargain for a different price? And in an automobile dealer, does everybody pay the same price for a particular automobile, or do better negotiators get better pricing? That's more of a dynamic model. Probably a better example of a dynamic model is airplane tickets and hotel rooms and other kinds of what's the right word? I'm trying to think of it. Products that have no value once they're delivered. So if we fly an airplane with an empty seat, we don't get anything for it. If we fly an airplane with that seat full, whatever we get for that is marginal revenue. So there's a very big incentive for hotels and airlines and other people who have services that disappear with time to negotiate price or have dynamic pricing. So airlines have very sophisticated dynamic pricing. It's very unlikely that the person sitting next to you in an airplane seat paid the same price for their seat that you paid for yours. because the pricing changes all the time based on the airline's um, evaluation of how many seats are available on the plane. If there's very few seats, they're going to raise the price because there'll be demand to fill those at a higher price. And if there's lots of empty seats, they'll lower the price. So the price changes daily, even hourly. That's a dynamic pricing model. And a lot of that dynamic pricing is enabled by the internet. Much harder to do in a physical environment to have that kind of dynamic pricing. So eBay is a dynamic pricing model, Priceline's a dynamic pricing model, hotels.com and all the various internet websites for airline tickets and so forth. Those are all dynamic pricing models. Pricing changes all the time. So first of all, you got to realize that there's two kinds of pricing, fixed and dynamic. Second thing you have to realize is that what people pay for is value. What's the value to the consumer? That's really what you're selling. What's the value? It's not so much what it costs you to make it, it's what the consumer values it at. Now there's constraints. Obviously you can't sell things for less than they cost to make, but that value is really, really important. So figuring out what the product's value is important, and then how, with the promotion part of the 4 Ps, we need to communicate that value to the consumer. And value can be lots of different things. It can be the physical value of the item, it can be status, it can be all sorts of different kinds of things can be part of the value of a product. Price sensitivity is an important aspect as well. So we can, if we have a price sensitive product and we have too much of that product, we can lower price and fill the seats on our airplane. And if there's very little price sensitivity, that lowering price may not have the same effect. So that we're going to look at a little bit of that in a few minutes, what price sensitivity means. So benefits versus price. Benefits are not just the price of the product. So if you look over on the right-hand side of this graph, which comes from your textbook, you've got total price, which is the purchase price. But then there's other things. Does it cost me to get the goods to where I need it? Is there a shipping cost or an installation cost? Do I have to be trained to use it? Are there repairs involved and upkeep involved? Do I have to finance it, and is financing attractive and available? What about the time and effort that it takes me to find, buy, and use the particular product? If it's difficult to get to, difficult to research, difficult to find, that's a cost, part of the price. Accessories, and then finally, what most consumers don't think about, the disposal or recycling fees for goods that have a life that's going to expire. What do I do with it when the life is over? So that's everything in the price, and then what we get for it, the benefits that the consumer gets. We have the features we talked about earlier in terms of features and benefits. The quality of the product, it's quality to last and do what I need it to do. The availability of service, so that it's easy to service. The availability of the product itself, is it convenient to get? The performance of the product, does it do what I really want it to do? And how much satisfaction do I get from the product, which can be a subjective thing. Some of that satisfaction may come from status or other things that are pretty hard to measure. So lots of different things on both sides of that scale, and those features get weighed. So when I'm looking at the price of a product, I'm looking either consciously or subconsciously at the benefits of that product. Moving that thing around, don't need to do that. So we talked earlier back here, we talked about price sensitivity, and price sensitivity for on an economic sense is measured in price, something called price elasticity. And I assume most of you have either had an economics course in the grad program already, or if you haven't, you probably had an economics course somewhere in your undergraduate careers. You may or may not remember much of it, but just do a quick review on elasticity. Elasticity means how much does demand change when price changes? So elastic products, they change more as price changes, they change more than the price change. And inelastic products change less. So in the example here, if we have a 20% change in price, an inelastic product might only change 15% in demand. So that's considered to be a price elasticity of 0.75. Perfect elasticity, price changes 20%, demand changes 20%. Perfectly elastic. And then for an elastic product, price changes 20%, demand changes 25%. So if you're thinking about pricing, if I reduce my price 20% and my demand goes up 25%, that's an elastic product. Therefore, price reductions in elastic product generate more revenue. In inelastic product, price reductions generate less revenue. And perfectly elastic price reductions would generate the same amount of revenue. Same thing for price rises. Really important to know whether the product that you're pricing is elastic or inelastic or perfectly elastic, because it has a lot to do with where you want to set price. Important concept, hard to measure. Let's think a little bit about some products. There's a formula there for price elasticity. Let's think about some products. Oil is inelastic, so gasoline is inelastic. The price drops 10%, consumption doesn't go up 10%. Consumption goes up, but it doesn't go up 10%. A couple of years ago, when the price rose a lot to $4, so it doubled, demand did not fall in half. It fell, but it didn't fall in half. So that's an inelastic product. There are products like that. There are products that are very elastic. It has a lot to do with several factors. So we're less sensitive to price. So things are more inelastic when we're just buying a little bit. So it's not a particularly large purchase, so we're less sensitive to price. So when you're in the grocery store and the candy bar is $1 or $1.05 or $1.10, you probably don't pay much attention. You just want a candy bar, you buy it. You don't even ask what the price is, probably. If you can't compare prices of substitutes, that becomes a way to create inelasticity in the price. So retailers and wholesalers, manufacturers, people who make product, try to make their product less easily comparable. And we'll talk about some of those situations in a moment, or maybe in the next lecture. If it's difficult to switch, that makes for inelasticity. So it's hard to switch from gasoline to electric cars. There's a difficult switching from a gasoline-powered car to an electric car. There's a large cost involved in switching. It's easier to just keep buying gasoline, which is one of the reasons that gasoline is inelastic. Sometimes consumers are willing to pay a price because they perceive quality, status, or another benefit justifying a price that might be higher than others. So that makes for an inelastic price curve. If you're sharing the costs, so if I have friends that own boats together, so they, 3 or 4 couples might own a boat together. They're much less price sensitive than I am owning my boat myself. So when they go to get new sails or an engine rebuild or repower or something, they're looking at paying 25% of the cost rather than 100% of the cost. So they become less sensitive to the price. If we see prices as fair, we're generally willing to deal with them. And sometimes if products are bundled, put together, it's harder for us to compare those prices. and therefore we are not as sensitive to price. So those are all different ways that if you can get your product into one of these ways, then you have a little bit more pricing power, so-called. You can set your price. Two basic kinds of costing: cost-based pricing and value pricing. Cost-based pricing, you start with whatever the product costs, and then you set a price to cover the cost, and then you tell the consumer about that value. So that's the way that many businesses operate. It's not a way that I think makes very much sense, and I used to have to fight this a lot in my own businesses, because most of the people who were in positions of setting price within the businesses I was running basically thought in a cost-based system. I paid this for it, I'm going to sell it for this plus, as opposed to thinking about what the product was worth. And that's a hard mindset to change. Cost-based pricing is really easy. I know what my cost is, I have to add 20% to it and I'm fine, or 40% to it and I'm fine. That's a cost-based system, and many businesses operate on that, and in my mind anyway, and much of the literature's mind, that's not necessarily the best way to price. Sometimes that leads you to prices that are higher than they should be, and many times it leads you to prices that are lower than they could be. So value-based pricing, to me, makes a lot more sense. What is the consumer's perception of the value of the product that you're selling? And what is the price they're willing to pay? And if I'm starting as a manufacturer, I might find a way to make that product so that it meets those needs of the consumer, or I might decide to just price things at value rather than cost, and that might lead to higher prices for some things and lower prices for others. So we'll continue with talking about pricing in the next lecture, answer the few questions after this, and then we'll go forward. Thank you very much.